Well, good evening, everybody. I am so appreciative for our panelists and those that are watching to join us on tonight. Welcome to Augusta Talks. Augusta Talks is a series that will explore the issues facing everyday Augustans, and it'll take an opportunity and an effort to explain them in easily understandable ways. Our inaugural event takes place now with a panel to discuss the non-discrimination ordinance that's in draft form that we've had a series of conversations about here in the city of Augusta. Currently, the Augusta Commission is deliberating on whether or not to adopt the ordinance. Our hosts and our panelists this evening are here to provide the community more clarity on what a non-discrimination ordinance is, who it affects, its legality, and the potential impact it could have on members of our community. And I'm incredibly proud of the panelists that we have on this evening. Folks who I've known for many, many years, many who I call friend because I've known you for so long. And it's a pleasure to have you joining us on this evening. And with that, I want to take an opportunity once again to welcome you to our inaugural Augusta Talks conversation series. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matthew Duncan, our host for this evening. Matthew is a local attorney and equal rights advocate who's been instrumental in helping us move our local community forward, and at the same time, drafting this ordinance and making sure that it addresses the elements that provide our city, a city that you've heard me oftentimes refer to as a city of opportunity for everyone, where people want to live, to learn, to work, and to raise their families. And this certainly will help us take another step in that right direction. And so with that, Matthew, I turn it over into your hands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you and the city for hosting this panel to provide our community with more information about non-discrimination ordinances. One thing I'd like to start out by saying is that when I introduce a panel, I would like each individual to briefly introduce themselves and give a little bit of backstory, just so that the other panelists and those watching can better understand who you are. For our first panel, who we have joining us is Melvin Ivey. He's the president of the Augusta NAACP. We have Jeff Graham, the executive director of Georgia Equality, and Kathy Willard, the former Atlanta City Council president and a leader in the equal rights movement here in Georgia. Melvin, Jeff, and Kathy, welcome and thank you all for joining us tonight. And to anybody else that's joining us by YouTube or the Mayor's Facebook channel, if you have a question for our panelists, please feel free to add them in the comment section. And if there's enough time, we will do our best to ask those questions. And with that, and in the interest of time, I would like to jump right in with our first panel and allow each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves. Mr. Ivey, can we maybe start with you?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Melvin Ivey, local pastor here in the city of Augusta, the Great St. John Baptist Church. I'm currently the president of the Augusta branch NAACP, longtime resident of Augusta, Georgia. Know quite a bit about the workings of our city government. So I'm excited about this new process that the mayor is putting on the table.
Thank you. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Matthew. I'm Jeff Graham. I'm the executive director of Georgia Equality. We're a statewide organization whose mission is to advance fairness, safety, and opportunity for members of the LGBTQ community, as well as our allies around the state of Georgia. I've been active in LGBT rights, the rights of people living with HIV, access to health care, and other social justice issues for the past 32 years. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Thank you. And Ms. Willard. Oh, Ms. Willard, you need to unmute your mic.
You know, somebody always has to be the one, don't they? Thanks for having me here. As you mentioned, Matthew, I'm formerly the Atlanta City Council president, and in the context of this discussion, introduced the first comprehensive non-discrimination ordinance in the state, and have been fortunate to be working with Georgia Equality to help advance these now in 13 cities across Georgia, and look forward to talking a little bit more about the details.
Great, and Kathy, thank you for the perfect segue. I was going to start with you, given your history with the first ordinance in Atlanta. And for those watching this panel, can you just briefly explain what a non-discrimination ordinance is and what its purposes are?
Sure. Well, we think about the context of different kinds of civil rights laws and ordinances that prohibit discrimination. On the federal level, we have laws that prohibit discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, and some other areas. Georgia is one of 5 states that doesn't have laws like this. So when someone in our state experiences discrimination and wants to figure out how to make it stop, their only recourse, unless they're in one of the 13 cities that have passed ordinances, is to file a federal lawsuit, which is a very timely, lengthy and expensive process, and often doesn't lead to a good resolution. I'll leave it at that, but the cities across the state that have done this have all had some things in common, and that is prohibiting discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations, including all of the federally protected classes, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity, and providing exemptions for the non-commercial activities of religious organizations, nonprofit, private clubs, and a few other things that I'm sure we'll discuss. As well as, I just want to state right at the beginning, these non-discrimination ordinances have nothing to do with the local school board decisions.
Thank you, Kathy. And I think when it comes to what's contained in this ordinance and in most ordinances, non-discrimination ordinances, we have public accommodations, employment, and housing. I think employment and housing for the average viewer are self-explanatory. Mr. Ivy, could you provide a better understanding of what is meant by non-discrimination in the public accommodations context?
Yes, definitely. First of all, when you're talking about non-discrimination, it lines up with what our national mission statement and our vision statement entails. It deals with, we deal with discrimination issues. One of the things that we find that a lot of people don't want to really deal with it is that a lot of discrimination is institutional type discrimination. So it is our hope that through a process like this, that we can dismantle some of the institutional discrimination that is in place, and also that we're able to reverse some of the unjust actions that have been taking place. Now, a lot of times, especially in the communities of people of color, for some reason, we seem to be the ones that are targeted. I often tell people that first you have to understand what your rights are, then you have to be willing to fight for them. So in the midst of the struggle that we find ourselves in with the NAACP, not only as a local branch, but also as a national branch, national organization, we have to understand that all Americans, everyone here in the city of Augusta should have equal access. So in order to do that, you've got to go in and put a system in that you require people to follow. Where there is no law, people do what they want to do. In a lot of cases, that's what's going on. Did a little quick research, and I discovered that there's a little over 300 cities that have such an ordinance as this, and a little over 21 states that actually have something like this. So I think the mayor's on the right, he's on the right road. I would love for our commissioners to lend a listening ear, listen to the community, because one thing I've discovered that if it's not in writing, you didn't do it. So yes, from a civil rights perspective, this is the right road. This is what we need to be doing in order to bring about a more just society.
Thank you. And Jeff, I'd like to turn to you now. I know that Georgia Equality is a strong organization when it comes to equity and equality, and is focusing on intersectionality and how discrimination affects so many different people in so many different ways. Can you, from your perspective, share with us why a community, a diverse community would benefit from a non-discrimination ordinance?
Certainly. Thank you, Matthew. So as Mr. Ivy had just mentioned, there's well over 300 municipalities around the entire country that have passed similar laws to this. And it fills in the gaps of where federal law leaves off. So certainly for those of us in the LGBT community, until federal legislation such as the Federal Equality Act, which has passed the House of Representatives twice, but we don't know that it's going to pass the U.S. Senate. We certainly hope it will, but it depends upon having 10 votes from Republicans before it could pass in the current Senate. So we just don't know the fate of the Federal Equality Act. And so until that passes, even though the Supreme Court says that it is illegal to discriminate against members of the LGBT community in employment, there have yet to be legal cases that look at housing, public accommodations, credit, and that all-important jury service. So there are still gaps to that under federal law for members of the LGBT community. So that's why it's of specific interest to us. But as Mr. Ivy again pointed out, and Kathy pointed out as well, Georgia is one of a very small number of states that actually has no statewide civil rights law whatsoever, which means that everybody that is covered under federal law is vulnerable here in Georgia. They're vulnerable because there is a cap on the size of businesses. So you have to have a business of more than 15 people before the federal law will kick in for employment or public accommodations. Certainly there's gaps in the housing laws. And frankly, it can be a barrier to have to file a federal lawsuit, even if you are currently protected under federal law. It's very expensive to do that. And it's very time consuming to do that. And so we feel that discrimination happens on a local basis. It's better handled on a local basis. So that's why non-discrimination law, such as the one that Augusta is considering right now, such as the one that 13 other communities here in the state of Georgia have already passed, and well over 300 around the country have passed. That's why it's important, is so that people know that their rights will be respected, that their rights will be sound. And frankly, I also like to think of it as a statement of values. We all want to live, work, and raise a family in a community that says discrimination in any form is wrong. And that's the best benefit to the city of Augusta, the county of Richmond, to have a non-discrimination ordinance in place or a comprehensive civil rights law in place, is to say very clearly, there is no place for discrimination in Augusta.
Thank you, Jeff. And Kathy, I'd like to turn back to you. I know you've been working with the non-discrimination ordinance context for quite some time. And are you aware of any cities that have seen an increase of discrimination complaints once a local ordinance has been put in place? And what I mean by that is there anything that causes, do these ordinances result in abuse, and are they being used to target businesses or anything of that nature?
I don't know of any instances that has happened since we introduced and passed the first ordinance in Atlanta about 20 years ago. Most of the other ordinances have passed in the last 2 to 3 years. And of course, last year, because of COVID, many businesses closed down and cities operated under, limited operations. So in the last year, for example, we're really just not seeing much of anything in terms of complaints. What I think is important, though, is that when you're a leader in a city, when you're governing a city and you're trying to bring a community along, you want to have tools at your disposal to relieve community conflict, right? You know, the last thing you want is for the city of Augusta, the city of opportunity, as the mayor says, you know, to have some sort of conflict that cannot be resolved short of a federal lawsuit, all the ensuing press, years of bad feelings festering. And what we have found with these ordinances, and we certainly found it in Atlanta, is that, you know, not only having the statement of values, but then having a tool to say, when you issue a business license to an employer, someone involved in the housing market, somebody offering public accommodations, is if you want to do business in our community, you have to do business fairly. You have to treat everybody fairly. You have to welcome everybody to your business. And if not, then, you know, the city has the tool of, fining them, or, you know, in some cases, removing a business license. And I think that's the tool is what is so incredibly important, because sometimes people, bad things happen to good people, not intentionally, right? Not that somebody has a policy of discriminating, but maybe some employee, really behaves badly to someone, and it's not the policy of the employer. We want to be able to get in front of a mediator. You want to be able to talk it out, resolve the conflict, make sure people feel like they're welcome to come to the business. So it's a tool for business owners as well. And it's a tool for patrons and employees to make sure that, that they're being treated well as well.
Thank you. Jeff, what have you seen in that context across the state after ordinance had passed? Has Georgia Equality, seen any major problems?
Well, we certainly have not seen any major problems. And I think that certainly one of the benefits to businesses is that, just as I had said, it can be very costly and time consuming to file a non-discrimination, a federal suit under federal non-discrimination laws. It also can be very costly and time consuming for a business to have to defend itself under a federal lawsuit. So that is certainly a benefit to businesses that is also important, that it's easier for them to be able to defend themselves. And again, there's the benefits of local communities, especially of the business community, far outweigh any potential concerns that there may be about abuse of these laws. We have seen around the country, there's been a number of economic studies that have shown that people want to do business in a community where they know discrimination is frowned upon, where lots of people have protections in there. You've got real estate apps such as Trulia that actually allows people to do their searches for real estate and housing based upon what municipalities have local non-discrimination ordinances. That's actually one of the filters that you can use. So someone who may be moving to Georgia from out of state, those 13 communities where these non-discrimination ordinances exist are going to have a competitive advantage over all of the other municipalities where it doesn't exist. And certainly, there's not been floodgates. Kathy talked about this, where we've got the most experience, and certainly within the city of Atlanta. We're still trying to compile some information on this, but to be honest with you, part of why it's difficult to compile information is that it's just impossible to prove a negative. And if there had been a flood of non-discrimination cases, if there had been a flood of frivolous lawsuits, it would have been on the front page of the local newspaper in these places. That just has not happened. Discrimination, unfortunately, does occur. And so I think, again, it's a source of civic pride that if there is a bad apple boss, if there's a bad apple business that wants to discriminate against someone, they will be held accountable. And I think that the community should be proud of that, not be afraid of that.
Thank you, Jeff. And Reverend Ivy, and I'd like input from Kathy and Jeff for this question too. What do y'all think a non-discrimination ordinance should contain, taking into account, the interests of the potentially discriminated against individuals, the business community, but also people of faith.
Okay, looking at it from the perspective of the NAACP, we believe that it should be an ordinance that addresses all segments of the community, regardless of your zip code. We also believe that in this particular ordinance, it should have not only an equity advisory committee, but also an equity review committee, so that they are able to have some input into this particular process. But also, especially with the advisory committee, these people would be everyday people who lives in different communities that have the opportunity to come to the table and look at different aspects of what's going on and bring a different viewpoint there, so that we're able to definitely hear from all segments of the community. So I think when you look at your ordinance, that is probably one of the most powerful things that you can bring that should be in there. There's a lot of other stuff that you can have in there, a lot of stuff that lines up with what our federal laws say. But I think that area of advisory and that area of review really gives the community that mindset that they have a stake in the game and they're being heard.
Jeff or Kathy, do you have anything to add?
I'll just say, in Atlanta, again, we passed ours 20 years ago and didn't really have much of a model here, certainly not in this state and around the country. And so I think, we did our enforcement through a human relations commission because we had a human relations commission and that was our best opportunity to do it. What we've seen in recent jurisdictions is that they have moved to sort of mediation and then, some sort of kind of hearing office or moving it to municipal court so that there's a little bit more both staffing of it, but also, folks who have the ability to look at some of the legal issues. But some communities, and I think Statesboro is one of them, and there's a few others, have kind of worked the Human Relations Commission sort of into that because, as you start these community discussions, it might surface areas of conflict where a Human Relations Commission could be really helpful in providing public education, both about what's possible within the ordinance, but also just, what's happening in the community around a given issue. Criminal justice reform in particular, is an issue right now that people are really hoping that their governments will address. And that's a perfect kind of thing for one of these sorts of commissions to start talking about and lending some community insight into. So I think that they're really powerful and commend Mr. Ivey for bringing this idea forward.
Yeah, and Matthew, the only thing that I would add to that, again, really echoing what Reverend Ivey said, it's incredibly important to have the diversity of marginalized communities represented. Another example of where federal law has a gap is that women are not covered. Sex, actually, it's not just women, it's sex discrimination based on sex. Is not under the Public Accommodations Law of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And if you look at the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the number of businesses that are covered and the types of businesses that are covered is actually a very narrow list that kind of looks at how people traveled across states in the middle of the 1960s. And so it doesn't take into account how people do business today. It doesn't take into account the importance of people being able to make sure that they can get adequate healthcare coverage and that they can make sure that a government office is not going to turn them away. So the definition of public accommodations, we hope, would mirror what is proposed in the Federal Equality Act, because that's frankly an improvement to the 1964 Civil Rights Law that's going to protect and enhance protections for all Americans, not just members of the LGBT community. So I think that that's an area to look at, is that definition of public accommodations. The other area is around the religious exemptions. While it's certainly important to make sure that people of faith are protected, and in fact, that's one of the reasons why we feel that these laws are needed, is that religion is a protected category. It's there to make sure that people are not discriminated against because of how they worship and what they believe. But at the same time, we need to make sure that those religious exemptions don't become so broad that they actually create a license to discriminate. We've had 2 Supreme Court cases, and I'm sure that our legal panel will get into this, so I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. But I do think it's important to know that there has been twice now that the Supreme Court has looked at the issue of religious exemptions when it comes to non-discrimination laws. And in both instances, while they, on the surface, had rulings that were in favor of the plaintiffs, at the end of the day, they affirmed that the First Amendment is a strong protection to people of faith, and they also affirmed that non-discrimination ordinances on either a state level or the one that was decided last week on a local level, like the city of Philadelphia, can be put in place and can be enacted without broad religious exemptions. So I think that that's a balance there that is important to take a look at, to make sure that places of worship are protected, but that religious organizations that are engaging in commerce and going about business, they need to be treated just like any other business. If you're open to serve the public, you need to be open to serve the public.
Thank you, Jeff. And I guess what might be our last question for this panel, we've talked about the benefits of the non-discrimination ordinance in Augusta and generally. Is anybody on the panel aware of significant negative impacts, particularly related to businesses being reluctant to locate to an area that has a non-discrimination ordinance, or a difficulty in recruiting talent to the area because of a fear of the non-discrimination ordinance that exists in that city?
Well, I would say, certainly speaking from Atlanta's perspective, but what I've seen is that this is an asset to a community. You know, large businesses in particular, you know, have to abide by federal law anyway. So there's nothing about this ordinance that would impact them differently than the practices that they already have. For Atlanta, we've used our ordinance many times to attract conferences and national sporting events, because when they go into a community where there's going to be significant attention, the last thing they want is some sort of disruption because there's community conflict. And you can only see, you know, look at Major League Baseball leaving you know, Georgia because of the voter suppression laws. You know, there is no business that wants to come into a state where folks aren't being treated right. And they'll have different reactions to it, but, you know, that is just not what they want to see when they decide to come someplace. So for Georgia, for Atlanta, and I think it's one of the reasons we haven't seen the General Assembly try to preempt this, is because they know it's an incredibly important, if not necessary, tool for us to be competitive with other communities that are trying to attract events. Similarly, companies that are here want to make sure that when they try to recruit talent, that talent knows no matter who they are, they and their families are going to be safe and supported in the context of those community values.
Thank you. I think we are getting close to the end of our time for the first panel. And so we do have about 4 minutes left. So I would like to give each of you an opportunity to close out and just maybe there's one final point you'd like to drive home about the non-discrimination ordinance. And Kathy, since you're still on my screen, why don't you go first?
Did you say me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, I just want to commend y'all for doing this, and I want to commend the mayor and the city council for embarking on this discussion. I think, you know, what's important is to do exactly these kinds of things, is to allow the community to talk about it, to understand how these work. Again, we've had 20 years of experience in Atlanta. I don't think that there's anybody that would come forward and say, you know, that ordinance was a bad idea, because it's been nothing but positive since we've passed it. And now we're seeing other communities come forward and understand the positive tool it is. So I think just, you know, keep the conversation going, don't hurry it, but also don't delay, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we've got a lot of experience with these, and you know, so it's not like you're treading on new ground.
Thank you. Reverend Ivy?
Yes, definitely. I just want to commend the other panelists, great wealth of knowledge. I believe that this is the road to go. Great conversation. If you're going to bring about change, if you're going to bring about an ordinance such as this, you definitely need to have the conversation. And what it does, I believe the benefit of this particular ordinance would be that we are not perceived as a Mayberry type town where 2 or 3 people run the whole show, but we are an inclusive community where everyone's welcome. And then I believe from that point, we get the best of the best, and we're able to not only embrace everyone, but then everyone in the community have an opportunity to grow, and everyone in the community feel valued. So I don't see a negative with this. I only see a positive, because those people who feel like they have no voice will have the opportunity now to say that I have a voice. There is something in place that protects me. There's some place that I can go and voice my concerns. So I don't see a negative with this particular ordinance.
Thank you, Reverend. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Matthew. And again, thank you, Mayor Davis, for hosting this forum tonight. I think that Reverend Ivy said it so well. This is about vision, and this is about values. It's the values of the community of Augusta. I have been coming to Augusta Pride for years. It's a great event. It's a great time to bring the entire community together. Augusta is a great city to visit. And this ordinance allows you to tell everyone that when you come to visit Augusta, we welcome you. So that's your statement of values. Your statement of vision, it's a vision of unity. It's a vision of where we need to be as a society, where we bring people together and say that we are stronger with our differences and we cannot be divided, that people, when they come together, when they are respected, they take pride in their community. The community takes pride in them, and that regardless of where you come from, how you look, how you worship, who you love, or how you identify, you're part of the civic fabric of Augusta. 10% of the population of Georgia already knows what that feels like. And my guess is that those of you who live in Augusta would be so happy to know that you could join the club with the rest of us. It's time to bring equality around the state of Georgia, and it's time to bring equality to everyone. It's not a pie, it's an unlimited source of values if you just embrace it and bring it to everyone.
Well said, Jeff, and thank you to you, Mr. Graham, Melvin Ivy, and Kathy Willard. And we will move on to our next panel. All right, good evening. So to the panel number 2 is a little more heavy on the legal side of things. The mayor sends his thanks to the first panelists. We greatly appreciate the input that they've provided. So what we're going to talk about now are federal, state, and local laws around non-discrimination. We have a great panel for this section. First, we have Scott Titshaw. He is a professor, associate professor of law at Mercer University School of Law. We have Michael Schutt. He is the Southern Regional Director at Land Legal Education and Defense Fund, the Southern Regional Office. And we have Ahmad Sheikh. He is an Augusta attorney. Thank all 3 of you for joining us. Again, for the viewers that may be on Facebook or on YouTube, if you have a question for our panelists, you can submit those. And if we have time, we will ask those questions. Now, Professor Titshaw, this seems to be one of the biggest areas of, I don't necessarily say confusion, but lack of understanding on the necessity of non-discrimination ordinance locally. When I have conversations with people, this seems to come up quite a bit. So can you explain initially where the non-discrimination laws are on the federal level, where they are or not on the state level, and then where a local non-discrimination ordinance could plug in any gaps that exist?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think Jeff Graham actually described a good bit of this terrain pretty well earlier, but there are protections on the federal level for, I think, each of the categories that's covered or would be covered under this ordinance. Those protections are limited, though, as he mentioned, with regard to accommodations, and they're particularly limited with regard to protection for the LGBT community, which is not expressly covered and which is not as clearly covered under some of these federal laws. They're also limited in a number of ways. For instance, the employment protection on the federal level, probably the most prominent protection is Title VII under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That protects against discrimination in employment based on race, color, religion, national origin, or sex. As Jeff Graham mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court in the Bostick versus Clayton County case last year did hold that discrimination because of sex also incorporated or included discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Those decisions, as he mentioned, haven't percolated up to the highest level with regard to other areas of protection, though, under federal law, like the Fair Housing Act, which is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. There are protections under federal law for persons with disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides those protections. So there are limited federal protections. Unfortunately, as was also mentioned by the first panel, our state law is not as protective as most other states. In fact, we're one of only 3 states in the country, along with Alabama and Mississippi, which don't provide protection in private employment discrimination on the basis of race and religion. We're also one of only 4 states in the country that don't provide protection against race or religion-based discrimination in the provision of services. So Georgia, part of the reason why these local ordinances, I think, are particularly important in our state is the giant gap between our state and a lot of other states. I think one reason why that could be really important to a community like Augusta, as you try to, or as you compete with other communities, for instance, for business dollars and for people who vote with their feet to live or not live in your community. You're, as I recall, and I haven't spent a lot of time in Augusta, but I think y'all are pretty close to South Carolina. And South Carolina actually is in much better shape than Georgia when it comes to these non-discrimination laws on a statewide basis. Those two provisions that I mentioned before, South Carolina does provide some protection. In fact, it generally prohibits private employment-based discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, age, ancestral origin, pregnancy, childbirth, etc. It also prohibits discrimination in public accommodations and hotels, restaurants, hospitals, theaters, bars, and again, maybe particularly important for Augusta, golf courses. So to the extent that you're competing with your neighboring state there, it could certainly help if Augusta had at least the same protections that South Carolina does.
So just to
go ahead,
if I may, just to kind of bring that home, there are federal protections that kick in the employment context at 15 employees or more. There are no state protections at any level of employment, which means that in Richmond County, without this ordinance, it is legal to fire or refuse to promote, or do anything in the employment context, and it's not illegal regardless of the reason that you're doing it. If it's one of those traditionally protected classes, race, sex, religion, it is legal to do that here in Augusta, Georgia.
Yeah, that's right, at least under state law. If it's an employer who's not covered by the federal prohibitions, as you mentioned, employers with fewer than 15 employees are not covered under under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, then yes, there's no protection for those employees generally.
I do want to turn from that 15 employee context, Dr. Shutt, to you, because I know you have extensive history with human resources departments and equity and diversity. If so many businesses that have non-discrimination policies in place, why is it important that the city create their own policy that protects employees?
Thank you, Matthew, for the question. Just to add some clarity, of my esteemed colleagues, I am not the attorney in the group. Lambda Legal is one of the oldest, largest legal organizations whose mission is to achieve full civil rights for LGBTQ folks and everyone living with HIV. And in my role, I'm working on policy issues specifically, while our attorneys are working on a lot of our litigation issues, and we work on impact litigation. And so, one of the things I would just like to note before adding to your or answering your question is, we are the ones that are often called in to get involved if we want to file if someone wants to file a federal case, because a lot of people don't have the resources to do this kind of work, and Lambda Legal raises money to actually do the work for our clients. And it is not a cheap process to go through for the business, for the employer, for others, or our clients. And so We have a lot of great folks that help us do this, and we don't want to have people go through this. One of the things that I would note in your ordinance, as you ask about employees and HR, is the fact that your ordinance isn't just looking at employment discrimination. And so I think that's one of the first things that I would say, is that it's not just about the employment piece. The next thing I would say is that, small businesses do not have an HR department. They may not have their own types of policies. And so to create something like this within the community is creating, as some of our former panelists had said, more access for people to get access to protections within the workplace. And so I think that that is a really important piece to put out there as well. As Professor Titshaw just pointed out, we just had the Bostock decision, and this was about employment discrimination and people being fired in these cases. We are still unsure of what may happen when it comes to promotion. The courts aren't quite clear on when it comes to hiring and promotion. So as we're talking about employment, we have to talk about all aspects of employment, not just a place of firing someone. And so I think that's an important thing to put out there. The final piece as a side note in here, and I think this has to do with access and cost, et cetera, is the fact that in the Bostock decision, there were two other plaintiffs in this case. And if you want to talk about the amount of time that it takes to move something through the courts, two of the three plaintiffs passed away in the process. And so it is important to note, and this is as Jeff pointed out, that we can actually take care of these issues on a local level to ensure that people are heard, and that the community can be engaged in that, and do that in a timely way. And a federal case is not something that is quick, easy, and timely.
Thank you, Michael. And I'd like to broaden this discussion to both Mr. Sheik and Professor Titshaw, just generally about the need for a non-discrimination ordinance, despite that there might be a patchwork of protections in the private sector. Mr. Sheik, you are an attorney in the private sector, and if you could speak to the need for an ordinance to protect any member of the community, despite the fact that there might be non-discrimination policies in certain corporations and businesses.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Matt. So in terms of having an ordinance and in terms of having a policy, in terms of, even a federal case, as everyone's already pointed out, it's about cost. Within the ordinance itself, it already has what we call alternative dispute resolutions, which are basically, instead of going to court, you can go through other means. And those other means, while they're a lot cheaper and faster, it is significantly cheaper and faster than going to federal court. Even in these, as one of the first steps in this is mediation. Mediation is a significantly easier process than a federal court case. It's as simple as going to the mediator between the employee and the employer. That's what's really important. I think this ordinance really goes to, it's not just about punishing those who might be, in violation of this ordinance. It's really trying to fix the problem, have that mediation, to have those conversations of why we feel one way or the other, why the employer was wrong or why the employee was wrong, that it wasn't discrimination. And so those conversations can happen at the local level. And they even happen before you even step into a courtroom. They happen when you have the mediator, or when you even have, I think you call it the hearing officer. Those are both outside of the courtroom, even before you step into a courtroom.
Thank you, Mr. Sheik. Professor Titshaw, do you have anything to add on that context?
Yeah, I would. I think those are good points, and both As Mr. Sheikh mentioned, the money issue is a huge one. And as Mr. Shutt mentioned, the timing is a huge issue too. If something goes, say for instance, to federal court, I mean, there's a reason why we say, don't make a federal case out of it. And it's, and everyone, whether you're a lawyer or not, knows that means keeping things simpler and not making such a big deal out of it. That's another thing about mediation that can be really useful, and possibly even these hearings before hearing officers, before things get to be too antagonistic and too much money and effort and feelings have been invested in things. If you can have mediation between the parties, if they're willing to undergo that, that can keep a lot of bad blood from developing, which again is a really good thing in your community as well as between those individuals. So I think that step that's part of this ordinance, as I understand y'all are considering it right now, can be a really fruitful one to the extent that it works out.
And we've talked a lot again about mediation, hearing officers, and causes of action. For the public that's watching, can the panel give some more insight into exactly what that means, as far as what is mediation, when would a hearing officer be involved, and a right to sue letter, essentially, say in magistrate court. The difference between those and what that would mean if they were discriminated against, and noting that the ordinance is still in draft form.
Right. Yeah. So as it's written right now, mediation is basically when you and the complaining party have a third person basically try to settle the matter. Now, the difference between a mediator and a hearing officer and a judge is a mediator doesn't actually make an opinion. He's there, or he or she is there to help negotiate settlement, to help negotiate something in the middle and compromise on whatever the conversation is about. And in this case, it's a non-discrimination violation or alleged violation, even at that point. As it's drafted right now, the complaint would go to, I believe, the commission, and then the commission would send out a violation letter, and that violation letter would go to the complaining person who is being complained, the employer in this situation for the most part. And then you would have a mediation, which is just a third party who has no opinion, who won't make an opinion, who will try to settle the matter. Then in the proposed settlement, or proposed ordinance rather, you have a hearing officer. This is a little bit of a step up, just in terms of the hearing officer will most likely make an opinion. He will say that I believe that, the employer is wrong. I believe the employee is wrong. He will make the determination. It'll be a lawyer. It'll be someone. It's going to be someone in the community. If that doesn't settle the matter, then you would go into ordinance court. And ordinance court is a little different than other courts, because normally speaking, if you watch Law and Order, if you watch any other show that tends to be a legal show, you always see juries and all of that stuff, a lot more flashiness. But it's between you, the employer in this example, and an actual judge, an elected judge. And at that point, that would be a final determination at this point. Now, you can appeal, you can go from there, but the whole point of step 1, 2, and 3, mediation, hearing officer, and judge, is that we get it done at this local level before it gets any closer to a federal case or even a Supreme Court Georgia case.
Thank you, Mr. Sheikh. Dr. Shutter, Mr. Titshaw.
I would just agree. I think at least my understanding of the current draft ideas use each of these 3 types of forum in the appropriate way. A mediation can work. It should be the first thing you try, and if it does work, it's ideal. keeping things relatively informal with a hearing officer makes sense as the next step, who is presumably doing fact finding and some evaluation, and then going to a more formal court if necessary, if that doesn't work out. So I think these sort of draft ideas are well ordered, and it makes sense the way they've been put together.
Dr. Shutt, do you have anything to add?
Nope, I am in alignment with my colleagues.
Well, we are getting close to what might be the final question. And one thing I would like to ask of the panel is, it's a recurring theme that comes up when speaking with elected officials and when they're trying to pass these ordinances, is whether or not these, if you put this in place, a non-discrimination ordinance, that you're inviting frivolous lawsuits or frivolous complaints, or you're seeing this influx. Is it, Dr. Shutt, with your experience with Land Illegal, do you see that? Are you familiar with any type of that in any city, particularly in Georgia?
No, and I think with the panelists before, I think Kathy in particular talked about that there was no increase in people wanting to sue or file more complaints or do anything that was frivolous. So I think it is the opposite, that this is inviting people in to be involved and engaged in the community in a very different way. It is not creating more chaos and more work and more dissent.
Thank you, Dr. Shutt. What I'd like to do, since I realize I did not give the three of you an opportunity to kind of do your introductory statement, is why don't we'll just double up a little bit. Dr. Shutt, if you'd like to just remind everybody who you are, and if there's anything else you'd like to say, and conclude the second panel.
Sure. Michael Shutt, he, him pronouns. I am the Southern Regional Director of Land Illegal, and as I stated before, we're the oldest and largest legal organization fighting for the civil rights of LGBTQ people and people living with HIV. We're celebrating 50 years of existence coming up in 2022 and 2023. And we have had offices in Atlanta for 24 years. And so we have been very engaged in the community. Personally, myself, I'm also assistant professor at the University of Georgia, Mary Frances Early College of Education, and have been involved in this work and organizing for the last 20 years. On a sort of a personal note related to this piece, Land Illegal's offices are actually moving. And as we were considering where we wanted to have our offices, we were looking at a lot of different factors involved in existing in a physical space. And so we have been in the city of Atlanta for 24 years. And, we have been looking around the metro Atlanta area to see where we want to be situated. And we know that Atlanta has access to public transportation and ordinances like this, et cetera. And we actually made a decision to not go to one place that would have actually saved us a little bit of money in our rent, because they did not have ordinances like this. They did not participate in the municipal equality index put out by HRC, et cetera. And so it's important for organization or for communities to know that we are making decisions about where we are situated as nonprofits, as businesses, and quite honestly, as personal households, and where we want to live and work.
Thank you, Dr. Shutt. Professor Titshaw.
Sure, yeah. I'm Scott Titshaw. I'm associate professor of law here at Mercer University School of Law in Macon, Georgia. So I'm probably the only person here who's not in either Atlanta or Augusta. And I have taught sexuality in the law for, gosh, almost 20 years now. I started the course at the University of Georgia as an adjunct when I was still practicing. I practiced immigration law for 12 years, and I've been actively involved in immigration law and immigrant rights communities. And I'm also actually a member of the Board of Advisors for Fair Fight Georgia's voter empowerment. Well, it's the Voter Empowerment Advisory Board. So I've worked on a number of the issues that that would be, I guess, that this ordinance would be helpful with, or the communities that this ordinance might help. I think it would be a very good thing for Augusta. I will tell you that I think one of the few unsuccessful attempts to enact an ordinance like this past year has been in Macon, where our city council approved it, but our outgoing mayor did not sign it in the end. I think possibly because it was too close to his retirement. But as much as I would hate for Augusta to have a step up on Macon, generally, you know, more power to you. I hope y'all do this, and maybe we'll follow suit next year. I think there's a good chance of that.
Thank you,
Professor Titshaw. I don't mean to cut in like that, but I think Augusta's already got to step up on Macon. Having been born in Macon, I moved to Augusta, and I'm now the mayor.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I suspect if you were, well, I don't know, but if you had been our mayor, I would have hoped you would have considered this more favorably than our last mayor did. So.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Sheik.
Yeah, thank you again, Matt, for having me on. My name is Mod Sheik. I'm an attorney here in Augusta, Georgia, and have been for a year now, actually. I'm from Augusta, went to school here, went to Augusta University, or what was Augusta State University, then it was Georgia Regents University, and now it's Augusta University. And so I graduated from there, ended up, unfortunately, crossing the border and going to South Carolina law, came right back home to Augusta, Georgia, and now I practice here in Augusta, Georgia, in property disputes and family law disputes. This ordinance just makes sense. There's just no other way to put it in terms of every factor it comes into, especially for cost. It's just so much easier to go through mediation, so much easier to go through a hearing officer, so much easier that, you know, the quote unquote final step is ordinance court, which is not even, you know, it's not a federal case. It's not a felony case. It's not anything like that. You're not really out there to punish the individuals. It's really a teaching moment. And so I just think it makes sense. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheik. All right, it looks like we're tracking well with time, so we are going to move on to our third and final panel. I think personally this is going to be my favorite panel. I'd like to introduce everybody first. First of all, we have Han Lee. She is the Chapter 13 trustee for the Southern District of Georgia. Thank you, Madam Lee, for joining. Reverend David Key. He's the founding pastor of Lake Oconee Community Church and an Augusta native. Meg Morgan Adams. She is a local transgender advocate. Reverend Mark Trim of MCC of Our Redeemer, local church in downtown Augusta. And I believe we may have Takia Browning. She's the former president of Augusta Pride and a small business owner. Thank all of you for joining us. I'd like to kick off this panel by Madam Trustee asking you or directing a question towards you that, of course, is open to everybody else to responding to. I know that a big concern, something that you are very interested in is equity and inclusion. And I know you run a quite large operation with staffing and administrative issues. do you think that our community needs this ordinance, and how would it impact an organization of your size?
Well, the previous panel alluded to what discrimination causes. So it leads to job instability, greater unemployment rates, and with that, it causes higher poverty. It even impacts employers and businesses. We may not have thought about that because it creates inefficiencies and higher costs, because I just recently read an article where there were more than 2 million professionals and managers leave their jobs each year due to unfairness in the workplace. And the cost of replacing these professionals was approximately $64 billion annually to the employers. So by getting the message out there, I think the first part is a discussion, which I think that this is great. And thank you, Matt, for bringing this organization together and starting this conversation, because we don't really know until we start the discussion that many people don't even realize that they could have been discriminated against. And some of them don't know what their actions are. But I think the first is the conversation to get the word out there. And so laws, I think, or ordinances, have the potential to alter the general public's perception of the norm. So the norm may be that, yeah, I can discriminate. I can, I have 15 or less employees, so I can discriminate and I can fire these people without cause. Whereas, do I have an echo? So I can fire these people without cause, but if we have the ordinance, I think employers, and not only employers, but you have business owners, you have customers, and you have just people in the parks interacting with each other, where they are more aware of perhaps some consequences, and that there's repercussions for discriminating. And it's not, I also feel like not everybody understands or is aware that they're discriminating. I mean, people may harbor a distaste for a particular group, or have a belief without sound knowledge of relevant facts, or some thoughts that manifest from stereotypes, and they're just not aware. So my biggest thing with the committee that I'm in, with the inclusion and acceptance, is putting the word out there and educating people. And I think one of the steps that the city is taking by passing this ordinance is to get the word out and help to alter the perception that may be considered a norm, but should not be considered the norm.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. I do want to get your particular expertise on if there are any administrative expenses that you think would be too burdensome with relation to a non-discrimination ordinance. If you're in charge of a large organization and you have to enforce this type of policy, would that be administratively overly burdensome to warrant not supporting an ordinance?
I don't think it's administratively burdensome. It's just like administering any other policies that I have. When somebody starts, or an organization starts a new process, there's a learning curve, and there may be some initial costs with that. But I think with training your employees, but that can just be cost of doing business. And I think that it's well worth the money. And there are a lot of organizations out there that can help a business and support a business with this ordinance. Like we've had some, like the mediation. And I think it's helpful to have the employers more aware of what what kind of impact they have to their employees. And so, no, I don't feel like it's a huge impact on the finances of a business. Because if you're running a business, you should already have many of these policies and procedures in place. And if you're not aware of it, I think that this is a time to start looking into that and getting some more education about that.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Lee. And I realize that I just, as with the second panel, did not give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and say who you are. So if you'd like to take that time, please do.
I help insolvent people get a financial fresh start as a Chapter 13 trustee. I've been the trustee for over 12 years now. I have a staff, well, it used to be bigger, but now I have a staff of 20 employees. And I enjoy this. I'm grateful that you invited me to this, and I'm looking forward to being a part of this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Where I'd like to turn next so we have two reverends, Reverend Key and Reverend Trim. Reverend Key is he was born in Augusta, and Reverend Trim is a pastor here in Augusta. And one aspect with the non-discrimination ordinance that's important and comes up quite often is the impact that it has on the religious community. So, gentlemen, I'd like you to take time to introduce yourself, and if we can start with Reverend Key, and explain to the panel and the public why discrimination protections are important for your community, and why having a non-discrimination ordinance may or may not impact religious freedom.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it. As Matthew mentioned, I am a native of Augusta. I was actually ordained at the First Baptist Church there in Augusta almost 40 years ago. I have been serving for 30 years of ministry on the edge of the CSRA in Greene and Putnam counties. I'm the founding pastor of the Lake Oconee Community Church, and I'm the former director of Baptist Studies at Emory University's Candler School of Theology. I was there for 17 years. And so, yeah, religious liberty has always been an extremely important aspect of my life, and something that I've promoted tremendously. In recent years, people have used the kind of religious liberty argument to seek to discriminate against other folks or for things that they disagree on. And we're entering an age of diversity, of acknowledged diversity. We've always had diversity, but we're moving into an age of acknowledged and empowered diversity, which really means for everybody, including people of faith, the dynamic of needing to re-examine how they interact with the greater public, how they treat folks, how they deal with diversity within their own congregational settings. And so this is a time of flux, and a lot of people are afraid, and a lot of people of faith have made actions out of fear that I would argue would be inappropriate. Two things I would like to point out is, one, there are more people of faith that support non-discrimination than a lot of people realize. What ends up happening in the news media is that they go for extreme voices, and a lot of more moderate voices, more reasoned voices in religious leadership and clergy circles rarely get the platform because it's not showy enough for news items. And so there's a tremendous number of clergy across denominations that are supportive of non-discrimination dynamics. And then in the lay circles, we know that churches are full of individuals who are in favor of anti-discrimination, and who through their workplace, through their family, through other places have learned to adjust to the diversity, even if their religious tradition has not. But we are finding in recent polling over 50% of even evangelicals being supportive of non-discrimination. So that's one. People of faith are pretty supportive of it. Number two, I think it's important that religion is one of the categories that's within this ordinance. And it's important because the reality is Protestantism has had a place of privilege for centuries within this country, and that is shifting. People of religious traditions who may have been experienced historically privilege may very well in the next decade or so lose that privilege and no longer have it. And so religion is also being protected within this ordinance. So not only do I think the majority of people in faith tradition support non-discrimination, but I think it's also important that religion is within the categories that are mentioned here, because one of the things I would argue to a lot of evangelical clergy folks is the reality of you being a privileged individual may be lost very, very soon, and you yourself may desire the protections that an ordinance like this actually gives. And so I think it's important for them to realize that as well. But Matthew, thanks for putting this together.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Reverend Trim.
Well, Matthew, thank you for the invitation. I'm Reverend Mark Trim of MCC of Our Redeemer. I pastor right on Green Street across from the Augusta Municipal Building there, and been involved with the MCC for the last 8 years, pastored 3 of those. I've been in full-time ministry for, I've tallied it up, so I'm only going to say 15 plus years. I've been ordained for about 15 years and pastored a couple of churches, MCC being my second, and have become more involved in the LGBTQ community and seeing us move towards progression and equality in an area that we can. Particularly when I was thinking about the question of how it impacts the religious community, it's an interesting perspective for me, because not only do I stand in the pulpit and stand as a minister, but I also pastor a very diverse congregation, and the non-discrimination ordinance would affect us on multiple levels. And a couple of things that I want to bring to light, in my opinion, and viewing it from a religious standpoint, is we're first encouraged based on our scriptures to be inclusive and to welcome everyone. And I really never have understood why particular people that own small businesses and that profess faith as their core doctrine or their core belief in their life, to step back and want to reject anyone. They're, not to get overly religious, but Jesus never turned anyone away that was seeking. And so for the religious community, it's very important for us to keep that in mind when viewing this non-discrimination ordinance, is that, why do we even need this? Because we should all be functioning in the standpoint of, everyone should be welcome around us. Everyone should be welcome that is willing to work. And the other thing that, because I've worked in environments where I was concerned about them knowing who I am. I am a gay man, and I was there to work a job, but I've, my thought process was, what if they find out? What's going to happen to me? And I dwelled on that a good bit. And I've also worked in environments where it's not an issue. And guess what I was able to do? Focus, almost solely on doing the job. And so how it impacts us is the fact that if you have to think about what, who you are, what you believe, and that completely needs to be kept under a rug or secret, otherwise your means of living comes in jeopardy. It just creates such bad mental health. You have stress, you have complete worries. I have people that have sat in my office because of that, being afraid that they would be found out. Many people that attended our church for years had to, we couldn't post anything on social media in case their jobs found out that they were of the LGBTQ community. And so it relieved that pressure that all you have to do is go to work and you perform your job, and that's it. And that's where it should all be, even with those who are small business owners and also of faith. And so the protection that non-discrimination ordinance brings, it to me just brings so much relief to so many different people on a mental and spiritual level, that they're focusing on the job. They're not sitting there focusing on, what if I slip up and tell somebody what I was, where I was worshiping yesterday, and that becomes an issue. So I think it's needed for Augusta, and Augusta's proven that it can be progressive towards things that are good for the community, particularly in the last several years. So I'm very proud the mayor's office and all of those that have gotten behind this to get us this far. And I hope we can see it through to the end, to the finish line.
Thank you, Reverend Trim, and thank you, Reverend Key. I think the protections, in particular of the religious community, but also, in considerations for religious liberty are important in the non-discrimination context. So I thank both of you for being here to help us with those two issues. I'd like to ask a question now of Ms. Adams, Meg Adams. She is a local trans advocate, and that's a particularly disadvantaged community nationwide. But she has been instrumental in advocating for and advancing substantially the legal rights of the trans community. And so she's here today to inform us on the needs the trans community might have for the ordinance, and explain a little bit about what the specific issues relating to the trans community are. So, Ms. Adams, I think you might be on mute.
What about now?
There we go.
Okay.
We can hear you.
All right. So my name is Meg Morgan Adams. I have worked in law and politics in the Augusta Judicial Circuit here for the last decade. I have a deep passion for social justice, and have been an advocate and an ally for the transgender community locally and on the state level for more than a few years now. And I'm also here speaking as a woman who has experienced discrimination myself, but specifically for trans people. I guess I got involved with trans advocacy when a client came to the law firm that I was working at, looking to do something as simple as change his name to match his gender identity, to match his gender marker. It's typically something that's very simple. It's just a few documents that you file with the court. And unfortunately, the judge that was assigned to his case denied his right to change his name. And because he had the courage to stand up to that judge, the Georgia Court of Appeals ended up ruling in his favor that it was completely unlawful what that judge did, and that he does have the right to change his name to match his gender marker. But before that, and that issue, I mean, that opinion was only issued in 2017. That's pretty recent. So the fact that it took that long to codify the rights of transgender people to simply change their name is just a perfect example of the work that is still yet to be done. Also, I think there's not enough people that understand what the T in LGBTQ+ means. And I think a lot of people are confused as to, you know, what it means to be transgender. And I think there's far too much discrimination in the workplace, and locally there are no protections for trans people. And I think that's not something that people really think about a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of trans people are lower income because of this, and because they can't find steady employment, and they can't maintain it, or they're denied positions that other people might not be denied. So I think, you know, the fact that it took this long for you know, state protections to be issued simply for a trans person to change their name, I think local protections for trans people are long overdue as well. I think while this instance of discrimination that I was just speaking on in the courts does have a happy ending, because the plaintiffs in this case were both granted their name, and now people can no longer be denied their right to change their name simply because they're transgender. It's still very cumbersome to go through the courts to try and you know, fight discrimination, whether you're trans, whether you're gay, whether you're a woman, whether you're Black. It's very cumbersome. It's very costly. It's very emotionally exhausting. I can tell you that from direct experience, after going through that case with that client of ours. It was very difficult. And thanks to our partnership with Lambda Legal, our client was not burdened with crazy attorney's fees. But not everybody's that lucky. And it was a years-long process. I think the petition was filed in 2014, 2015, and we didn't receive an opinion until 2017. So to have your life hanging in the balance that long is stressful, and it's unnecessary, and it's also an extreme waste of resources. So I think what this ordinance would eliminate that really cumbersome legal process, because the courts are bogged down enough as it is. So to require people to continue to fight discrimination through our justice system is only going to bog it down even more. I mean, and especially after the last year that we've all had, the courts are even more bogged down than they ever were before. So I think that this ordinance creates a more efficient avenue for not just fighting discrimination, but addressing it, and a less costly avenue, and just kind of a less stressful avenue. It's not fun to be in court. I've been sitting in court with people for over a decade, and no one's ever happy to be in court. So discrimination is not something that needs to be addressed in the courts anymore. I think this is a much easier, just simpler way to address these issues, and to ensure that people are not denied their rights or harmed by other people's. It could just be someone's ignorance. So. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adams. That's very, very nice to hear from your perspective regarding all the work you've done for the trans community. Thank you. I think we are running close to our time limit. I do want to take the time to ask one last question to a dear friend of mine, Ms. Takia Browning. She is the former president of Augusta Pride. She's a small business owner. She is a strong activist in the Augusta community. And Takia, after I ask the question, if you want to take an opportunity to introduce yourself. But my question is broadly, and after you speak, we can open it up to the rest of the panel. How do you see any community, particularly Augusta, being impacted by a local non-discrimination ordinance, both personally, but also as a small business owner? I'd just like to know your perspective on the necessity of why the work that you do is so important.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me, Matt. And hi to everybody on the panel. I am in the middle of multitasking, so this is why you see the outside and the car and everything else. But a non-discrimination ordinance in this community, or any community for that matter, only strengthens the community at large. It doesn't leave people who are of the community out of the community. Nobody likes to just pay taxes and die. And unfortunately, there's always been a saying in the African American community, I don't have to do nothing but stay black and die. And that's a real sentiment. And it's heard from our elders, it's heard from people who have come before us, it's still heard from my parents. I don't want to just stay black and die. I want to live where I live. And I want to live and be at peace and raise my family and go out with my friends and work like anyone else. And if I can't just go to work and work, just do the work that I'm paid to do, that's a big problem. I was outed at my job. I was outed, and I was outed by friends. And they didn't consider that outing. They considered them checking up on me to see what was going on with me. It was very uncomfortable. And I knew 2 other people there who potentially, were of our community. And one person helped me through that. And I'll never forget her. And this was when I was in my 20s. So a non-discrimination ordinance so you can work in peace? Who doesn't? First of all, if you have to get up for 8 hours out of the day, you might as well like what you do. That's to start. You need to like what you do if you're going to leave your home, spend time away from your family with other people and strangers who you may or may not know. You need to like what you do, and you need to be comfortable where you have to do it at. And if you can't do that, it's a major problem for the city. We're in a community that has a film industry. Augusta has a film industry. And industries that come from outside of the South will hold you accountable for still living in a Southern mentality and a way back mentality, the mentality for generations that we should not be living in. We're too progressive as a people to be still looking at somebody and not liking them because of the skin that they didn't have any choice to be wrapped up in. That's childish. As a business owner, when I hire people, I want them to know that they have a comfort. I also want them to know that I have a comfort. I need them to do a particular job, and I want to hire them or fire them or whatever I need to do the right way, not because I have a bias. My bias should not stand up to that at all. I don't care if I'm black, white, green, yellow, purple, anything. So this ordinance is only going to help the community. If somebody feels like the ordinance doesn't help, they need to go back and check some of their biases. It's just that simple. We're too mature and too adult to be picking on people and bullying people as adults based off of the fact that we don't like who they sleep with or where they go to church or where they go to party or who they party with. We're too old, we're too mature for that as a people. So
well said, Ms. Browning. Thank you very much. We are at the end of our time limit, and my understanding is the mayor would like to issue some closing remarks to everybody involved and to the public before we conclude the evening.
Thank you, Matt. Let me begin my comments by one. Dear thanks to you for hosting each of our panels this evening. Those who were part 1, 2, and 3, I want to applaud you for sharing your truth and your willingness to engage in the most important conversation for us of Augusta. Quite frankly, I think it's us engaging in a conversation that's important for the entire CSRA. We've got a unique opportunity in that artist for everyone who wants to live, to learn, to work, to play, and to raise their families in our city. We are staunch advocates for that. You have a champion in the mayor's office, not only to bring these progressive ideas to the fore, but we will be in the trenches helping to engage, educate, and empower elected officials alike to make sure that we get this done. This is our inaugural Augusta Talks. And as we're concluding it, I want to encourage everyone to stay informed about what's taking place and shape with this draft NDO. At the same time, you can see what additional Augusta Talks will be a part of our series by visiting www.engageaugusta.com. That's www.engageaugusta.com. And on that website, you have an opportunity to track the ongoing Augusta Talks series as we move forward. Once again, I want to thank all of our panelists, those that are near and far, and who have taken time out of your evenings to share your thoughts and your innovative ideas about how we can make Augusta a place of choice, providing opportunities for all of our residents as well. Matt, thank you again for helping to navigate this place, and we look forward to your ongoing efforts to help us get this ordinance across. Again, with that, everyone have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I may say one last thing, it is the start of Augusta Pride Week. We have the festival this Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It is one of the greatest honors of my life to be involved in the organization, and it's a great event for the city, so we hope to see everybody there.
Fantastic. Be well and be safe as we kick those events off this week. Fantastic. Thank you.